Welcome to Beyond the Bee, an ongoing dialogue about the past, present, and future of the B Corp movement. Co-hosts Emmy Allison and Ryan Honeyman facilitate an open and honest conversation about the B Corp movement, advise companies on how to increase their impact, and provide a deep dive into the new B Corp standards that are shaping our community.
I'm Ryan Honeyman, a partner at Lyft Economy. My guests today are Achim Hensen and Duarte. And first up, Achim. So driven by his belief that collaboration lies at the heart of humanity, Achim has spent his career rethinking how companies work and how they can unleash their full potential. That mission became personal when the organization he helped build was sold and new power brokers took over simply by the power of money. Struck by this experience, Achim co-founded the Purpose Foundation and coined the term steward ownership. Today, with the Purpose Foundation, he champions steward ownership. As a steward and managing director of Purpose Consulting, he supports entrepreneurs in building ownership structures that align with their values and mission. And with Purpose Ventures, he invests in steward-owned startups. Achim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And next up, Luis. So Luis Duarte is the co-founder and CEO of Amoofy, an AI-guided storytelling platform helping organizations capture and learn from personal narratives. With a background in impact investing and philanthropy, he's held leadership roles at Imaginable Futures, Zoma Lab, and Gary Community Ventures. Born in Mexico, Luis brings deep empathy, curiosity, and a passion for human connection to his work. He serves on several boards. Formerly, he served on the B Lab board of directors and believes storytelling is essential to healing, legacy, and social change. Luis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan.
Great. So I'll start with a bit of a framing. So people listening to this podcast might feel like, why are we having this? So I wanted to invite Achim and Luis to talk about steward ownership and how this movement has the possibility of dramatically increasing the impact of the B Corp movement. And I'll also just do a framing of the Purpose Group, just so folks have a sense of what Achim's work is like. So the Purpose Group emerged from a simple yet powerful recognition. Something is fundamentally broken in the way most companies operate today. While organizations have the potential to be beautiful, collaborative expressions of human creativity, they're often shaped by extractive ownership and rigid hierarchies. In response, Purpose set out to support a different kind of business, one grounded in freedom, accountability, and purpose. Their focus landed on ownership and finance as the core leverage points, which led to the creation of a new model that they call steward ownership. So steward ownership flips the script. Company control remains in the hands of mission-aligned stewards, not absentee shareholders. And profits are treated as a means to a purpose, not an end in themselves. Over the past decade, Purpose has built a global ecosystem of nonprofits, consultants, and mission-aligned capital providers to help businesses transition to this model. While pioneers like Patagonia, Bosch, and Nicosia have shown it can work, the path is still complex. Through advocacy, education, and tailored support, Purpose is working to make steward ownership more accessible and to reimagine what the economy could look like if more companies were designed to serve life, not just shareholders. So maybe Achim, I'll start with you. And, we got a sort of an overview of Purpose. There was something in the bio about having started a company and then being forced to sell. Can you give a little bit of the lead up? Like, how did you get into the work you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. To be precise, I didn't start that company, but it was about 10 years ago when we founded Purpose. And indeed, an experience being part of an exit within the company led me to co-founding Purpose and the Purpose Foundation. From background, I'm a business psychologist, so it's a little bit weird that I ended up working in ownership and financing questions. I would have not thought that 15 years ago. Back then, I worked as an organizational developer, and I helped that company back then, which was an online platform for holiday apartments. And I helped them to build organizational structures that focused on, back then we said it focused on purpose and self-determination. And we kind of broke up the traditional way of working and all that. And those two values were always in the middle of what we did. And I put like 5 years of my life energy into that company. I was not an owner. I was just like, in my words, I would say I was giving my entrepreneurial energy into that company. And I never really cared for it. Am I an owner or not? I just loved that company. I loved what we were doing. And then there was this awakening moment, to make it short, that one day people stood in the office and said, "You are part of a new family now." And that was their way of describing, hey, we bought the majority of this company. Because before that, the company was founder owned 100%. I think a lot of the beautiful stuff that we did before, the reason was that it was still founder owned. And then, yeah, those people I had never seen before stood there and said, "We now own the majority of your company," which meant they now control that company that I spent so much time working in. And that was a very bizarre moment for me, to be honest, because if like it sounds very normal, and I think so many people experience that. But what happened in that moment was that by putting money on the table, people got into the position of power. And that felt strange to me. And then it kept going, like it was 51% that they bought. And then they resold it, obviously, a couple of years later. It became part of the vision fund of the SoftBank. And it destroyed a lot of the stuff that we worked on back then. But my main like pivotal moment was, what a strange human mechanism of distributing power within companies. You talk about experience, being socially close to the company, being socially close to the purpose, to the mission. And then people you never see put money on the table, and by that virtue get power. It's so normal, but yet so bizarre. And that, yeah, then a couple of months later, I met my co-founders and we started the Purpose Foundation, mainly with the question, which was, how can a healthy ownership structure looks like that actually enshrines purpose orientation and self-determination, not as values on the wall, but as a legally enshrined construct. And then we stumbled upon those pioneers and then coined the term steward ownership, gave words to the principles, and then the stuff happens, like what emerged till today.
Fascinating. And yeah, it's actually a very similar story to the B Lab co-founders. You know, one of the reasons they started B Lab was because they had started And One, the basketball company, and then in 2006, 2005, they wanted to sell the company, and they had to sell to the highest bidder, and then the private equity company that bought it sort of stripped out all of the social and environmental benefits that they had created. So it's a similar pathway maybe for you to sort of get to this place. And Luis, let me turn to you. So your background, how did you come to, you sat on the board at B Lab, you're definitely familiar with the B Corp movement. How did you come to the steward ownership movement? What's your background from that perspective?
Achim, I love hearing your story because I think it's incredibly common. It happened to me as well. And I think that's part of, it really has shaped the way I look at things. So going back, all the way back when I was a little kid, I was exposed to income and wealth inequality in a trip that we did to rural Mexico. And from that point, you could see who in those little rural towns had the power. And it was the person that had the money or that owned the little forestry kind of compound. So it's been present. But I think as I have grown, so Amoofy is my third company, but the previous two, I needed to do like everything that any entrepreneur needs to do to raise capital, right? So at some point with my second company, I had a values misalignment with the most recent investors. And at that time, I was 28, 29. I didn't know there was an ecosystem that was called kind of social entrepreneurship or social impact or social anything, right? So one of the things that happened and opened my eyes was that I attended this program in Boulder, Colorado called the Unreasonable Institute. And what this institute did was they brought mentors, investors, entrepreneurs from all around the world, all trying to learn and do the right thing. And wealth was not at all the primary purpose. It was, how do we maintain the planet that we care for? How do we maintain the relationships that we have built? And yes, we need the fuel, we need the capital to make this work. But is there a way that we can look for values aligned capital that it's not completely extractive, which is what we have all been exposed to in the past? And that's when I met and I heard about B Lab for the first time. This was 2011. Immediately after going back to Mexico, I opened the B assessment and I failed it for my recycling company. I think I got like a 92 point, which was above the 80 point threshold. And I was so excited. So I gave them a call, and it might have been Andrew Casoy who answered the phone number, because it was like 4 years in or 6 years in. And they were very kind. And they said to me, Luis, we're not yet certifying companies internationally. So thank you for your effort, but but it's a no. I'm like, okay, whatever. But I fell in love, right? And I fell in love with the possibility of, wow, you can actually be intentional about all your stakeholders and not only your shareholders. And then a few years later, I ended up working for a family office in Denver that the founder, 87-year-old person, said, there's got to be a club that everybody wants to be a part of. And randomly, through another advisor, Jet Emerson, we heard about B Lab. And Sam was like, can we offer them some capital so they can bring the whole effort and energy to Colorado, so we have more companies that are caring for the planet, for the people. So Gary Community Ventures gave B Lab the first localized grant to open an office in Colorado, because they wanted to have the highest density of B Corps in the state, so we could have a much more thriving state. That was my first kind of real connection to B Lab. Then I moved to another family office, which did the same thing for Chile, to start Sistema B in Chile. And then I think it was 2018 when Andrew and Bart invited me to be on their board. And it was a beautiful journey of 7 years, not only being on the investment side with this family office, is also the philanthropic side. And on the B Lab board, looking at everything that we have done, everything that we still needed to improve. But the last thing that I would say is, after all those experiences, one thing that became very clear is that, yes, it's great to be a public benefit corporation or to have in your bylaws some different mechanisms, but that's not enough. It's great to have a B Corp certification, which is great for marketing purposes, to attract talent, to live within your values. That's not enough, because you can have all of those things, and when the need for capital is such, where you need private equity or you need like a larger check, then you see often and often the story that Achim just told us, where extraction comes in, values are very different, intentionality is very different, and at the end of the day, bottom line is the most important thing. The people, they don't really care, they don't really matter. The way you do your operations, if it's impacting bottom line, then we need to change it. And then everything that you work for as an entrepreneur with your vision goes away.
Achim, I'm wondering if we've gotten sort of far down the path, but like maybe just simply defining, because, you know, at Lift Economy, we're a worker-owned cooperative. So I'm thinking, oh, is that steward ownership? Or, you know, there's ESOPs in the US, there's companies owned by a nonprofit, there's Patagonia's Purpose Trust. Like, how would you simplify what steward ownership means to folks?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So maybe I put that into context, how we stumbled upon it, because I think that helps. As I said, we're thinking about that question: how can a healthy ownership structure looks like that puts purpose front and center, and that redefines the role of profits and self-determination? And then we stumbled upon pioneers like Robert Bosch of the company Bosch from Germany, and Ernst Abel from the company Zeiss. And they already 130 years ago thought about different ways how to structure ownership. Because I think some days nowadays it's like steward ownership, this new cool thing, and it's very new and it's very modern. No, it's a very, very old idea that we rediscovered, gave some words to, formalize the principles, but it's a very old idea. And we looked at what those entrepreneurs did, and what they tried to do is put a perspective on what they think entrepreneurship is into legal concepts. And then they use different techniques, as you just said, Ryan. Some of them use foundations, some use trusts, some worked with cooperatives. And we looked at many of those companies and wondered, what are the regardless of if they used a foundation or a trust, what are the red threads, the principles that go across them? And those are the two principles of steward ownership as we define them nowadays. The first one is that people hold power who are very close to the mission and the purpose of the company. And the power within those companies, so the voting shares, they cannot be bought or just inherited, but they get passed on from one generation of entrepreneurs to the next one. And then the next one, so the first one is the principle of self-determination. And then the second one defines the role of profits. And all those companies, one way or the other, made sure that profits are used to further the purpose of the company. It's not a private asset anymore, but the profits get used to be reinvested into the purpose, used to be donated, used to pay better wages, etc., but not used to just exaggerate, not to externalize more and more capital. And the important thing about those two principles is that they are not just written on the wall somewhere. They are not just in the entrance hall, big value statements, but they're actually enshrined in a way that is non-changeable. So even if they wanted to, they could not just throw them out again the next morning to then again resell everything. And you could wonder, why is that not the most boring idea in the world? You can say, okay, why should people be excited about steward ownership? And just to make sure, I think it's so important because if you enshrine steward ownership in a legally binding way, what you actually do is that you break with two of the most powerful distribution mechanisms of power in our society within companies. Because normally there's two allocation mechanisms how people get into power within companies. First one is you are Elon Musk and you just buy power in companies. You just put so much money on the table that the power goes to you. That's the story I told, way smaller scale. Or the second one is what Warren Buffett calls the lottery of sperms, or lottery of births. You simply, by being born into the right family, become an owner of one or many companies. Those have been very powerful, very well used in the last decades. And what steward ownership does, if you enshrine those two principles, it adds a new principle of power allocation, which is more a question. It's who is the most able one to take over the voting shares to further the mission into the next generation and into the future. And that really changes something because suddenly you don't have to buy yourself into power. You're the right one to take over. In some companies, that could be all the employees. In other companies, it's just two people. For Bosch, for example, it's 10 people who are the stewards of Bosch. That gets passed down over generations. But that's the core of steward ownership. And then you can do that with trusts. You can do that with foundations. But the best thing would be, and there's lobbying going on in many countries by now, to have official legal forms that have that enshrined in the official legal form in the nation state and not with using other mechanisms like foundations and veto shares and trusts and all that. And just to finish up, why I think this is such a fundamental shift, I think we're at Beyond the B here and talking about the B Corp movement. I think in a way, it takes something further because it really tackles the deep design of the company on an ownership level. And it redefines the role of the profits. And I'm not saying everyone should do that. I'm not saying this is the best for everyone, and yada, yada, yada. But what I'm saying is it is a fundamental shift because it enshrines a certain perspective of the role of the company within the society. And it doesn't add something on top of profits. So everyone should now have the right to get profits, but we still kind of leave the quality the same. But it kind of flips the coin a little bit. It has its purpose in the middle. Everyone agrees about that. Everyone can earn a fair share and all that. But its purpose in the middle, and profits are a means to an end to fulfill that. And that's depending on the society you live in the world. I mean, I want to maybe it's important to name that as well. I sit in Europe. I sit in Germany, and the idea of the extreme focus on shareholder primacy and the fiduciary duty to only maximize profits, it's a very different story in the US compared to, for example, Germany. The idea that it's only a purpose of a company would only be to maximize profits, it's it doesn't exist that much in Germany as it does in the US. So it's really dependent on the cultural context. But we see steward ownership by now really emerging in very different cultures. So that's interesting for me that it apparently doesn't really only resonate in a certain culture, but really goes across societies and cultures. Yeah.
Luis, you want to jump in?
I'm really enjoying this conversation. Ryan, thank you for bringing us together. Achim, you made me think about two things. One, I remember working with my kind of first experience in the family office. Sam Gary, 87-year-old, incredibly humble, smart person. He would do things to benefit all the stakeholders. And he started his company, I don't know, maybe 1939, 1940. So it was not like a current state of affairs. He was just doing and building a school and building things because his community surrounding the business just needed, right? It was the way he was wired, not the way he was reading it on Twitter or Forbes, right? So very interesting kind of concept of how in somehow Purpose Foundation has rediscovered something that has been there as an option for a lot of us, but it's not widely known. So that's one thing this is why I love this podcast, and we need to make sure a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs hear about it. And I love your point as well, Achim, like this might not be for everybody, right? It's okay, but it's a beautiful alternative that has worked in the past for hundreds of years. So that's one point. When Sam passed in 2021, which was a very sad moment, as kind of, he would call me a fellow traveler, which was a beautiful statement. He ended up writing on a one-pager his kind of ongoing principles for his family office. And there's so many ways, because I was on the board of that family office for 5 years, so many times we would go back to his guiding principles and then make decisions because of what he had envisioned, the purpose of what he has built. However, I think interpretation, and because it was not legally bound, then there was a lot of room for interpretation. And as soon as we had a new leader, then you could play with that, right? So I think he really, if he had known about steward ownership, I think he would have implemented different structures. So that's one memory that came to mind and a real example of today. I also think about a lot of these foundations, a lot of these institutions that are here in perpetuity, that's another conversation, but they have embedded.
Yeah, but it's a good one to have.
Yeah, but they have embedded kind of the purpose and the way they need to do things for like the next 500 years, which is not something that I'm excited about. I think, again, there was an event that was very extractive of value and capital, and now someone owns that and is saying what to do with that, which is like, again, I don't think it aligns with the values of any of us in this call. But so that's one. The last thing that I'll share is I am based in Denver, Colorado, but right now I'm in Mexico City, and there's an event that I'm attending called the Impact Days, where people are just beginning to learn about Sistema B, just beginning to learn about BLEV, So to your point, Achim, when you think about Europe, or you think about Asia or the US or Latin America or Africa, the context and the awareness is very different. I'm having conversations right now for my own company with some kind of high net worth individuals, investors, impact investors, and the conversation is very different to the one that I'm having in the US, where the market is, I think, bigger, more mature, also more extractive in some ways in the US. So it's very interesting to be sitting here with both of you and just recognizing that there's a long way to go, but I'm very excited to be in that path, walking the walk. And it's hard, but I think it's a beautiful alternative that all of us need to consider as entrepreneurs.
I want to quickly react to that, Luis, because as I just talked about Robert Bosch, and you now talked about, or in the beginning talked about social entrepreneurship, and now the term impact came into our conversation. I think it's important to name that the more there is a need to further impact entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, I feel that somehow it takes for granted that there is the normal, which is a non-impact, non-social economy or entrepreneurship. And I would say Robert Bosch would have said that for him, entrepreneurship inherently is a social act. There is not like the normal economy, and then you have to like build around that a little bit of nice impact. But economy and entrepreneurship, understood in his way, is a social act. What does he mean? He means people need shoes. Someone who creates shoes solves a problem for society and humanity. The more the profit maximization sits on top and everything gets financialized, the more I think the need occurs to build more social entrepreneurship and impact, because it takes the normal for granted, which is the normal is profit maximization and financialization. And I'm not willing to accept that, to like let the impact and the social act of entrepreneurship being pushed to the side, because it's like, no, let's have that conversation. It's not the normal and then some niches. We can still discuss if entrepreneurship is not a beautiful social act, because I understand myself as an entrepreneur. I know so many entrepreneurs who like do something out of an intuition of, hey, I want to solve a problem. And somehow it nowadays, it almost has like a little bit of a bad vibe sometimes. When people say, I work in the economy and I do that and that, because people then think entrepreneurship equals profit maximization and egoistic behavior. I don't understand doing business like that. I want to like at least have a multitude of diverse understandings of what entrepreneurship and doing business can mean, and not this monoculture of it means profit maximization.
I appreciate that, Achim. And I think it sounds like Luis with Sam was his name from Gary Community. Yeah. And then, with Bosch and maybe Zeiss and some of these, Yvon Chouinard at Patagonia, there are examples of companies who just did the right thing. And I think what maybe we're trying to get at, which is how do we encourage more companies to do the right thing with some structures and systems that allow them to really think that way? And Achim, I'm wondering if someone's listening to this and they're already like, okay, I like the idea of steward ownership. Maybe we could take this down to like an example level for a company. So maybe and then Luis, I want to turn to you and think about how you approach this. But let's say I'm a 25-person marketing or services B Corp. I'm already maybe a benefit corporation and I'm based in the US. I'm like, okay, steward ownership. This sounds great. I want to do it. Like, how do you advise companies to then like, what are the steps that they need to start thinking through to do steward ownership?
Yeah, it actually fits a couple of companies I work with at the moment, that size of the orientation or the purpose there. So the very first step is the one that everyone has to take. They have to understand that the concept of ownership is one you can play around with. It's not a fixed thing. Ownership is not God-given fixed thing. Ownership consists of mainly two aspects. The one is who holds the power. The other one, what's the role of profits? And that you can combine in any beautiful way you can imagine. You can really be like an artist and like use that in a way that just fits your set of values and your answer to the question, what is the company? Because that's the next beautiful thing, that you can just redefine and define yourselves. You don't have to be told by a professor or by a legal form that already exists. And that's what I do with all the entrepreneurs I work with. I encourage them to understand the flexibility of ownership as a concept and the flexibility of what is a company for me. And then I help them to define that for themselves. And first is the question, what is a company for me? What's the role of a company? And then, because I don't want them to be told by me what's the right thing to do. I want them to find something that is coherent for themselves. Even if nobody would ever know they do it, it creates something beautiful for them. It's freedom for them. It's not a constraint. It's not something they really want to push for marketing reasons. It's all good. They can do that. And I think it's worthwhile, because customers need to know and employees need to know and investors and all that. My approach is they should find something that feels coherent and creates freedom for themselves, because it fits their entrepreneurial idea of what a company is. So that's the very first step. Then we do something like a stakeholder mapping. We really map what is the need of the given stakeholder and how does that fit into the picture. And then we end up with something that we call a future ownership memo, where we don't talk to a lawyer till now, right? We just create an overview of what's the goal, what are the needs, what do we want to build, and then we go to a creative lawyer and say, how can you build this? Like, what's the cheapest and best way how to build this? And then it really depends. Do they sit in the US? Do they sit in Germany? Is there already a legal form? Can they work with foundations? Is there someone who can hold a veto share to create steward ownership? So that would be a very rough sketch of what we do. In the middle, I would spice in a little bit of a TED talk and motivational case studies of other entrepreneurs. I think it really helps. And I think that's a bridge to what the B Corp movement does very well, to tell success stories, to give a stage to very brave change entrepreneurs who try to find their new ways. And I think in the steward ownership movement, it's similar, that there are some awesome, brave pioneers who just started doing it. And we kind of tell their stories, and it helps for us to listen to those stories, understand that. Typically, then another question comes into the process, which is, do I need some money at one point? Do I need capital flowing in? If no, it makes it easier. If yes, we need to develop structures, steward ownership aligned financing structures that are still possible within steward ownership. And then we build that into the process.
Beautiful. Luis, I'm wondering if you could speak to, was that your experience, and where are you at in Amoofy's journey towards steward ownership?
Yeah. So we started 15 months ago, so very early stage. And I think I had the pleasure to speak with Adrian, Achim's brother, and he was instrumental in guiding me and really, I think, pushing me to ask some of those questions, right? Or answer some of those questions. One of the things that has been a challenge is when you are just beginning a startup, it's more difficult, right? Because it's a path less known, and especially I think in the Americas. So one of the things that we continue to have a very open conversations with our legal firm is our vision. To your point, to him, the future ownership state, that hasn't changed. And we have brought in, I would say, very friendly values aligned capital that I was fortunate to have those relationships because of 15 years of working with capital providers that trusted the team, trusted me, trusted the vision. And they knew that I have had 2 previous experiences with traditional capital that didn't pan out. And it was not fun for anybody. So this time, and I'll share a little bit about what Amoofy is and the path, because I think it's important. Amoofy was born from a health scare at a family level, where my dad unexpectedly fell into a coma. He was in that state for 2 months. And this was 2018, while I'm kind of sitting in an executive position in one of the most important family offices, I would say globally. And I go and I see our humanity and our fragility when I see my dad completely in kind of a very, very fragile state. And the question that came to me was, why didn't I take the time to capture his story before he is almost gone? And it haunted me. It was very hard. I was like, yes, I'm doing all this beautiful work. But if I look at my own legacy, my own story, I have 2 kids, I will forget his life. I will forget his details. And now it's gone. So thankfully, life gave us a second chance. And as soon as he was recovering, I'm an avid reader. So I started reading books about end of life, the questions that were important to ask. So questions as simple as, Dad, what was your favorite toy when you were 8? And the magic of the response when he was recovering was incredible. So that's how it all started. The power of intentionally trying to understand someone's story, right? So when I think about the business model for Amoofy, we're elevating voices and enabling spaces for individuals to share their most precious memories, their story, right? whether it's for an individual, for a family purpose, or an organization that is trying to understand their stakeholders, their employees, customers, and they really want to understand their lives. And this is interesting because one of the things that my dad did when he had a business, I'm pretty sure the Bosch family does this, and Sam did this. They would walk on the floor of the warehouses and have conversations with the people there to really understand their stories. So again, now with technology, we're enabling the possibility to going back to meet people to people. And when I think about the path, the future path for Amoofy, I don't want anybody to be messing with the stories of people, right? I want that to be so ethically well stewarded that yes, if at some point we have the opportunity to sell, they can buy the technology, they can buy like whatever, but the core of what we're building needs to remain for 1,000 years because it's our humanity, it's our stories, right? So that's my future kind of outlook. And that's why I will continue to be excited to have Purpose Foundation as a partner that can help us get there. But it's been difficult. It's been difficult because when you are a technology, AI kind of leveraging startup in the US, the conversations that are very like coming your way are traditional venture capitalists. Like you have an exponential curve for growth. This is great. Like we can use the technology to sell people more things because now we know their stories. And I'm like, yeah, like this is not really what we're kind of going after. It's a very different ethos. And I would love for Amoofy to be around 131 years like Bosch, right? That's the hope. So if that's the hope, then the future statement and the structure of ownership needs to be embedded now. So if I'm not here anymore, 10 years, 20 years, life is short. Even with the experience that I had with my dad, I'm always thinking about, I need to embed these principles now. So it's an ongoing conversation, but that's where we are. That's where we are. And it's interesting to be, again, Mexico City having conversations with some investors here where they look at me like, so is this just like a B Corp? And I'm like, no, not really. It's like, it's a little bit higher level, but it's great to have those conversations because you open minds to Achim's point. You like, this is not new. Let me just tell you the story of success that other firms that looked at entrepreneurship as one thing, they just did it because it was the right thing. So anyway.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. And Achim, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute on the idea that the multiple flavors and different ways is like the best approach. So it may actually be. But I'll take the devil's advocate position and say, one reason the B Corp movement has been very successful is it's like, here is the model B Corp legislation that is passed each state by state. So there's 45 different states who have exactly the same, not exactly the same, but many same features of the B Corp. It's one standard. And, there's a lot of countries that have passed benefit corp legislation like Italy and Colombia. And so my question to you is, would there not be some value in like, this is the steward ownership model that like an entrepreneur can sort of take off the rack of like, this is what you do, and like, it's a step-by-step process in a way that retains that deep core purpose and like the two components of self-determination and purpose-driven profits going to purpose, but creates a little bit more of like a standardized, like step-by-step way that companies can do steward ownership.
Oh, sure. There are two thoughts on that. First, there's kind of a whole workbook that we created for people who can't afford our consulting services because we just try to open source everything that we know. We don't want to like force anyone to be consulted by us. And that's a little bit of a step-by-step approach workbook. You can work through that, best practices and all that. And then secondly, the whole lobbying effort of pushing legislation to create steward ownership legal forms is exactly that. The Purpose Foundation should not be needed nor should a foundation legal hack be needed to create steward ownership. I should go to the notary and off the shelf create a steward ownership legal form. And that would enshrine the role of profits and the asset lock being enshrined in the legal form. On top of that, you can decide, is that a steward ownership form where like 10 people hold the steward ownership, the stewards, or is it the whole, is it all employees, or is it just one person? On top of that, do we want to create a more nuanced governance structure so that the core of the core being power cannot be bought, but you pass on the power to the next one, and the other one having the purpose asset lock, so the role of the profits being defined and not being extracted anymore. That should be like legal form, off the shelf, bam, beautiful. And I think at the moment it's a structural disadvantage for entrepreneurs who want to build that kind of company compared to the normal form. So I think that even from a liberal perspective, is like, how can we disadvantages the one entrepreneurial model compared to the other one? So I totally agree with that one. My comment was more like, there's some beauty in, on top of that legal and technical baseline, there are multiple forms of understanding what is the most important aspect of steward ownership and build that in a way that is just coherent for you. And I think there's something to not push too much over all the entrepreneurial ideas that are out there.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Luis, in your sort of progress on the path towards Amoofy doing this, so it sounds like you're talking to capital folks who are, you're trying to raise capital in addition to maybe, are you at the stage of getting the lawyers involved and you're like, okay, we're doing a trust or we're doing a nonprofit that owns it, or like, are you at that level of decision making yet?
Not yet. We were very fortunate, Brian, to explore how the technology that we have built for families and individuals could help organizations. And I'm very happy that the rocket is like really then blossoming because, and I'm going to use Achim's example of shoes. One of the problems that we're trying to solve is to have organizations better listen and really understand their people, right? There's surveys, there's like NPS scores, there's like focus groups and interviews that are, again, all extracted. All of them are extracted. You want to know what kind of, how better to sell them things versus let's get to know each other as people so we can increase engagement, we can increase brand loyalty, we can increase whatever ideas are in the front line that are actually much more valuable than at the board level because of the disconnect. So really trying to close the gaps. So once we did that offering, then January this year, we started seeing, we have about 100 organizations on the pipeline that are, okay, let's engage with you all. So we are, Ryan, at a point where we need to start seeing more revenues coming in, more like beautiful contracts. And then I think with the revenue structure, friendly capital comes in, and then we'll have resources to then build a trust. But what's very, I think from the beginning, this has been discussed from the big, even with the legal counsel, the way that our bylaws are structured, it's already opening the path to reach that. So my hope is that by the end of the year, we're there, and I'm working even closer with Achim and the Purpose team, or those that are here helping in the US or the Americas. One thing that I want to elevate is we continue to see, and again, connecting it with B-Lab, with kind of Friedman's shareholder kind of primacy thing. And those are the stories that are being told, right? When I was in college and then went to kind of do my MBA, everybody was like, build something that you can sell in 3 years, build something that you can like that. And look at this kind of super wealthy, like very like serial entrepreneurs, they just build. And then at some point, I think the stories that need to be kind of also told is, what is enough? So that's one thing. Like, why do you want to keep extracting and building, amassing kind of wealth in a way where your profits are not continuing to pursue the benefit of your organization? To have so much wealth that you can buy into power of organizations that you don't even know what they do, but you want more wealth. And then 3, the more you amass wealth, and I have been fortunate to see some of this incredibly wealthy, ultra, whatever kind of label you want to put on the family that I have been able to be in service of. Some of the questions that we struggled with was, where do we put this new kind of dividend that came? And then you look at the planet, which is
Are rich
our
people
home.
happy, Luis? That's the question we all want to know. I'm just kidding.
So
I don't
I'll
think
answer I'll answer it in 2 ways. One is, one of the things that I love about B-Lab is this core principle of understanding interdependence, interconnectedness. And it's not only that, Ryan, you need to be healthy and you need to be good for me to be healthy and be good. Like, you are part of me, right? We are all interconnected. We're all interdependent. But then you go one step above, and the oceans and the forests and like everything is also us, right? So when you have the mentality of, I want to amass wealth, I want to just kind of continue to extract, well, the Amazon's going away. I don't really care, because in my castle, I have beautiful windows and I can look out. Dude, that's gonna last this much. Like, at some point, everything's gonna burn. So the level of consciousness, I think, that we need to continue to push up, it's very important. So that's one way of answering. The other one is your question about, are wealthy people rich? I think every individual finds their own path, right? But one of the patterns that I have seen is, because of themselves holding power, everybody that reaches out to them, not everybody, but 90% of the people that reaches out to them, they want a piece of it. So the level of mistrust and the level of having a challenge to build authentic relationships, not because of them, but because of how people are coming to get them, it's very hard. And when I experience that with some of the people that I work, it's very sad, because it's hard to trust. It's hard to trust anybody. And that's just a consequence of amassing wealth. So I hope a lot of people would understand this. So the objective of, I want to be a trillionaire, is like, well, you got to think it. You got to think through if you really want that to happen to you and to your legacy and to your family. So these stories are not told enough. So I'm happy to be elevating some of these views.
Yeah, what Lewis now said, because he introduced the term of trust, and I think there's something super important about that word and in connection with steward ownership, because you could look at the companies choosing steward ownership and say, okay, they're enlightened, they want to do that. There is another argument why steward ownership makes total sense. And Charles Kohn, the chairman of the board of Patagonia, was at our conference, our last conference in Berlin, and he put it beautifully. He said, in the long run, the market's going to solve, because picking steward ownership in those forms, they're going to, in the long run, create an advantage in the markets, because the customers trust you more. The employees put more of their actual force into the company, because what is the company? It's a group of people. And especially in times where it's not about doing the stuff machines can do, but bringing in like the human aspects of collaboration, like creative collaboration. It's like, in what company do you do that more? In the company where you can trust that that's going to, like, over generations solve the purpose, or the company where you know that probably the next 10 years is going to be solved to private equity and blah, blah, blah. So there's something where it creates a competitive advantage. In customer relationship, it creates a competitive advantage. it fundamentally changes the relationship between the capital providers and the company. The social dynamics change quite a bit. And I do agree that in the very, very long term, we might see and we will see that this can create a competitive advantage. So that's the one thing I wanted to say. And Charles' colleague Greg, he said, I think it's the best kept secret of capitalism, what we have here. Because it combines like this really, really deep motivation and purpose drive with the markets and takes the power of entrepreneurship and combines that. And when we started, especially the professors in the US told my colleague, my co-founder, Armin, they always told him, because he was studying back then in the US, and the professors told him, Armin, that's a nice European, naive, romantic idea, but this can never work. Like, why would anyone get up in the morning and do something without the possibility to maximize profits? And it's like, yeah, we don't believe that, because in our hearts, we think that's not what drives motivation and blah, blah, blah. But then we looked at the studies, especially from the Nordics, where enterprise foundations have a long history, and we do have a lot of data. And what we interestingly see is, for example, that the companies that do that in the mid to long term are more profitable. So they don't aim for profit as an end goal, but they are more profitable, and they're just reinvested into their purpose. Employees stay longer. They score better on ESG measurements. So we do have quite a bit of data to show the first signs that in this argument of Charles to say this might be a competitive advantage, there is some truth to that. Funny side note, by the way, we found out that people in those companies stay married for longer. Why ever? You can think about that.
Wow. That is the benefit of steward ownership right there. It's like,
yeah.
And just to add to that, Ryan, you know that there's a new way of kind of for companies to interact with the standards of how do they move forward to become a B Corp. So I was really excited to try to bring together purpose with B Lab. And we did a lot of effort in kind of what's the right time and how do we position this? And a beautiful quote from one of the B Lab leaders that came to me, the kind of statement was somewhat like, Luis, the gold standard for any B corporation is to go all the way to steward ownership. So it's true, right? I mean, to the point of Patagonia's chair, like this is the best kept secret in capital. It is, because again, we're going back to the origin of why people started business. It was to solve an issue. It was to solve in the way prosperity was created for every stakeholder. And I think we just missed that. We went to like the pendulum swung too far, and we're seeing how power structures are continuing to destroy all of us. So let's kind of recover from that.
Yeah. You know, Achim, we were talking about money and wealth, and I think one of the things on a lot of business owners' minds, especially in the US, I'm not sure how it is in Europe, but there's a lot of baby boomers who are going to be retiring soon, and people are looking at steward ownership as a way to, it's what Yvon Chouinard did at Patagonia. And so could you speak a little bit to how structured exits or how do exits work in steward ownership businesses, and what options exist for founders who are not saying like, I want to give away the company for free, I think is like Yvon Chouinard did, but also want to instill those values and have some money from the sale.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think we danced around the bush a little bit till now to answer that question. And I'll make it a little bit broader before I answer the baby boomer question. I want to pick up what Louis already said with venture capital and how to finance and all that. So just to make it crystal clear, you can still finance companies in steward ownership. You can still invest in them. And what changes is, we call it not like steward ownership aligned financing. And what changes is that investors become kind of financing partners of the company while preserving the company's entrepreneurial autonomy. That's the first thing. And then what they try to do as well is they try to refrain from commodifying the company as a whole. So the entrepreneurial control is never being overtaken, and the economic claims towards the company are always in some form limited. And that picks up the notion of Lewis, like, what is enough? And it's limited in terms of either duration or amount or influence, but somehow it's limited. And when we started, people told us, you can never, ever finance a company like that. Nobody would ever do that. Like, who would talk about capped profits? That's bullshit. Like that, again, romantic idea. And then Sam Altman came along and like raised billions for OpenAI with capped profits. You cannot finance a serious company like that. It's just a small social enterprise you can finance like that. And then he comes along and like starts one of the most important companies in the world right now with capped profits. He even called it at the beginning, it's a capped for profit company. And indeed, it's capped. It's a very high cap because it's high risk, but it's capped. So it ends at one point. It's enough at one point. And that after explaining that, there are multiple ways how to do that technically. You can give away a non-voting share, for example, and you just define a buyback price. So I give you shares for $10 today, and in 5 years I buy those back for $50 a share. And that's the cap that we define. You can also build revenue-based financing where you say, okay, for the next 15 years, you get 2% of the revenues, and then it ends after 15 years. You also say you give away a non-voting share, and you fix the valuation mechanism. And it's on the it's the freedom of the entrepreneur to decide at what point they want to, with the fixed evaluation method, buy back those shares. Those are some forms of exits or exit mechanisms that you can use that are not like special to steward ownership. You guys know that those kinds of mechanisms get used quite a bit now. And when I think about all that, a quote pops into my mind of one of our advisors and thinking partners, who is Albert Wenger of Union Square Ventures, himself a very, very successful venture capitalist. And he put it very beautifully one day. He said, venture capital is a hammer, a very strong hammer, but not every company is a nail. And I think what we try to do at the moment is create a multitude of company versions and try to create the right capital quality to enable those companies. And I think it's interesting that those qualities, even a company like OpenAI sees at the moment they do something so important that it might influence all of humanity, they come across stuff like capped returns and no automatic board seats for the capital providers. It just makes sense. Like, let's alone like the governance. You can look at the governance of OpenAI and say there's a lot to improve and all that, but it's about the patterns. It's about seeing the red lines here. But I don't want to jump around the bush of your question, Ryan, and still answer the baby boomer question. We actually financed, we do have two investment companies that within the Purpose Group. One focuses on startups and the other one on like alternative private equity. And for both only focus on steward ownership. And for the second one, the later stage, we actually finance those transformations. So we provide, you're the baby boomer, you want to transform your company to steward ownership. We define something that we call a founder compensation for you because you somehow forgot to take enough money out of the company so you can have a good life for the next 20 years that you still have. But what we do is we look at the potential of the company. We define a founders or entrepreneurs compensation. We, as the capital provider, provide some of that. A bank might jump in and provide the other aspect of that. And then the company over the next years pays that back to us, and we create the liquidity that's needed for you at the moment. Or you're an entrepreneur like Yuan China, who already took enough out for him to be good enough off to live the rest of his life and then transforms. But there are those capital providers who jump into that stages, and they get more and more, I would say.
So Achim, one of the things that we spoke about was this idea of wealthy investors and wealthy folks. And as all of us on this call know, listeners know, a lot of that money is driven towards venture capital and traditional private equity or the stock market, for example, in the US. And a lot of folks are looking for creative ways to align, maybe their money with their values. And so are there ways that you've seen, folks who have money to invest with these new models emerging? How do we sort of bring those two worlds together a little more and sort of make it more visible and possible that folks can see this as a way to sort of, align their money and their values?
So I'm super happy to see that over the last 10 years, we we have a growing investors network of various kinds of investors and wealth holders who are interested to invest in those steward-owned companies, even though it's new to them, even though it's a very different kind of investment relationship. But there are those pioneers on the wealth holder side and the investor side as well, who are actively looking for those kinds of relationships to companies. But what I think is that there is a information gap between all the intermediaries sit in the middle and like tell the wealth holders there's one way how to invest. This is venture capital and this is private equity, and maybe there's a little bit of impact left and right. And I think sometimes because the people in the middle, they let's be honest, they profit from that, right? It's a good mechanism for them. So sometimes I think the knowledge doesn't get too close enough to the people who actually hold the power, because those are the ones who can make decisions. Like a middle manager in a standard venture capital firm or in a private equity firm, that's not the one who can actually go to a new path. Like we need to talk to the people, and the people need to know about those models who hold the power. They need to give the mandate. They have to give the go towards new paths. So, and there's an information gap that we need to bridge. And I think we are in a good way, but there's a lot of ground to be covered to funnel enough capital towards those new models.
Yeah, Luis, you want to jump in? This has been your world, I think, for a while.
Yeah, you're making me even think about, some of you know about the Social Capital Markets Conference, SOCAP, which happens in the Bay Area. And when it started, I think 2008, 2009, I can't remember the exact year, but one of the panel's keynote speakers said, I really hope that impact investing will grow to like $100 billion of assets under management. Well, today, the Global Impact Investing Network released a report that the impact investing assets under management is $1.57 trillion, right? So one of the things that happened, and I remember this clearly, in 2010, 2011, there were a few very wealthy individuals that would go with their asset management firm and said, hey, I want to invest differently. Like, I'm not thinking in a traditional way. I want purpose. I want impact. And the traditional managers would say, yeah, that's like, it doesn't work. Like you'll lose all the money, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work. And then some of them were courageous enough, subversive enough to say, well, I'm taking all of my money and I'm finding who is able to help me with. That then created such a waterfall of people understanding that there was a different way. And with what Achim said, I'm just envisioning that this is going to start happening more and more. So asset allocators, financial managers, be aware, because this is the next wave that it's happening. And I'm already seeing it and manifesting it. So don't be falling behind, be on top of it, and be learning about these new wealth holders that are speaking, thinking, looking for more steward ownership opportunities where purpose is embedded. Don't be left behind.
I fully agree. And I found it funny when Patagonia moved to steward ownership, everyone loved it. Like LinkedIn was full with all the investors saying, yeah, Patagonia, go. And then I wondered, like, what's the contribution of the current investment system to create the next Patagonia? And I think that's what's gonna happen. Like there is so much opportunity in there to support the next Patagonias and not only enable the ones who are bootstrapped and somehow make it without investment. So I agree with you, Luis. Yeah.
Let's maybe turn to what the two of you need right now. We like to ask this towards the end of the interviews. Luis, maybe I could start with you. What's something that you need that would be supportive for the listeners to help you in your journey? And then where can folks go to learn more about Amoofy?
I think what would be incredibly helpful, not only for me, but a lot of entrepreneurs alike, is to learn more about where can we find the right partners to help us with the think through the process of how do we move towards a steward ownership structure, and where can we find those wealth holders or capital allocators that are willing to engage in that dialogue. That's one of the kind of, if I had a magic wand, that I would love not to be having conversations with the traditional VCs and just go to the place where we're all aligned in the intention and the values, right? Because the opportunity of Amoofy is in front of us. So it's not like woo woo. It's real. It's a real business. That's one thing. So would love to continue to have conversations with both of you and continue to partner with Purpose and people like him as well. And people can go to find more about Amoofy at www.amoofy.com. It's AMOOFY. It's an acronym of A Moment of You, because it's really you who share your story.
And Achim, same question. What do you need right now? How can the listeners support you, and where can folks learn more about Purpose?
There's so much that Steward ownership needs. I would say, first of all, come and join the party and join the path that we travel. We're happy to travel together with so many more. And obviously, this work of like all the entrepreneurs are finding new ways to do this in a world that's built for very different companies. So every wealth holder who wants to support the initiative in forms of donations for our nonprofit work of field building helps us tremendously, and the idea. And wealth holders who want to invest in steward ownership funds or directly into those companies are helpful for the movement at the moment, I would say. But in general, I would say, think ownership. Think it for yourself and pick it up. And if steward ownership like is an aspect that really fits your business, then that's what the movement needs.
Great. And then, website, or I think you had mentioned like some book, like there's a book out or a booklet.
There's a lot of stuff that you can read. So our website is purposeeconomy.org, and we have TED Talks on there. We have free PDF books. We have workbooks. We have case studies, term sheets. So there's a lot of content on there. And if that's not enough, then send me a mail via LinkedIn or reach out to my colleagues and us. And we're happy to provide even more.
Fantastic. Well, Luis and Achim, this has been a really enlivening, inspiring conversation. And I really think and hope that the B Corp movement can really embrace steward ownership as, I really like how one of you said, the gold standard of, where B Corps can go. Because, at the end of the day, ownership, who owns and has control, and then where do the profits go are really at the core of, I think, impact. And so I just want to appreciate both of you for stewarding us on that journey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hey, Beyond the Bee listeners. If you're looking for even more inspiring conversations with leaders on the front lines of our movement towards just futures, be sure to subscribe to Next Economy Now, produced by the team at Lift Economy. Next Economy Now broadens the focus beyond the B Corp movement to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, democratic, equitable, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Check out our latest episodes at lifteconomy.com/podcast. You can subscribe to Next Economy Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.